Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Andrew, and until a couple of months ago, I thought I had life all figured out. A great career as a contract manager, a decent house, and a marriage that, while not perfect, seemed solid. Then came Aaron. Or, as I call him now, the human wrecking ball. Tiffany, my wife of 7 years, had been distant for a while. You know how they say you can feel it when something's off? Well, I felt it. The late nights working, the sudden obsession with her appearance, and the way her phone seemed glued to her hand, those were all red flags. I tried telling myself I was imagining things. That was until the name Aaron started popping up in her conversations. Aaron said this at work. Aaron's so good at his job, you'd like Aaron, he's super charming. At first, I played it cool, brushing off my growing unease. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I know, privacy and all that. But I couldn't help myself. The message preview was from Aaron. Can't wait for our meeting tomorrow, Tiff. Winky face, that stupid winking emoji burned into my brain. When she came back, I casually asked about her workday, trying to gauge her reaction. Her answers were short, her tone defensive. Why do you care so much about Aaron? She snapped, and that was when my alarm bells really started ringing. She'd never been like this before. I started paying closer attention. She'd mention Aaron more, but always in passing, like she wanted me to think he was just some harmless coworker. But the way her voice would soften when she talked about him, it made my stomach turn. Something was definitely up. That's when I made my first move. I'm not proud of it, but I needed answers. I bought a couple of small hidden cameras and placed them strategically around the house. One in the living room, another near the front door, and one in the kitchen, places where she spent the most time on calls. I wasn't just looking for signs of an affair, I was also suspicious of how much Aaron seemed to know about my job. Some of Tiffany's comments made me wonder if she'd been sharing confidential information. It didn't take long for the cameras to confirm my fears. A few days later, I reviewed the footage while Tiffany was at a work dinner. Sure enough, she was on a video call with Aaron. I couldn't hear everything, but their body language said it all. Her playful smiles, his smug expressions, and the way she laughed at everything he said. At one point, she leaned closer to the screen and whispered something that made him laugh and shake his head. My blood boiled. But it wasn't just personal. They were discussing a contract for my company, a huge one that I'd been working on for months. Aaron dropped subtle comments about how he could leverage it to their advantage. That's when I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was sabotage. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark, piecing together their plan and figuring out how to fight back. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was my career, my reputation, my entire life on the line. After that sleepless night, I decided I needed more proof, something solid that couldn't be explained away. The cameras had given me a glimpse into their secret world, but I needed the whole picture. If Tiffany and Aaron thought they could ruin my career while sneaking around behind my back, they had another thing coming. The next day, I left for work early, but instead of heading to the office, I swung by an electronics store and bought a second set of cameras. These ones were even smaller, with audio recording capabilities. I installed them while Tiffany was out for lunch with her girlfriends, another one of her convenient excuses. Meanwhile, I started monitoring my work emails more closely. Aaron was connected to a rival company, one that had been gunning for the same contract I was managing. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. But when I cross-referenced some of the dates on Tiffany's calendar with the meetings she'd had with Aaron, it became clear. He wasn't just a rival, he was actively trying to undermine my work. And Tiffany was helping him. Over the next few weeks, I played it cool. At home, I acted like the same old Andrew, loving husband, supportive partner. I didn't want Tiffany to suspect anything. But inside, I was boiling. Every time she smiled at her phone or left the room to take a call, my suspicion deepened. And every time I reviewed the footage from the new cameras, I found more evidence of their betrayal. It wasn't just their flirty conversations. Aaron had been feeding Tiffany specific questions to ask me about my work. At first, she tried to be subtle, casual inquiries about the contract's progress or the kind of clauses we were negotiating. But as time went on, she became bolder. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching TV, she turned to me and said, "That big deal you're working on, it's pretty competitive, right? What happens if the other company offers something lower? I played dumb. Why do you ask? She shrugged, pretending it was just small talk. Just curious. You've been so stressed lately. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile and said, it's under control. But that wasn't the worst of it. One day, when Tiffany thought I was at the office, she had Aaron over to the house. My stomach churned as I watched the footage later that night. He walked through my front door like he owned the place, greeting her with a kiss on the cheek and a smug grin. They sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee and laughing like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then the bombshell. Aaron pulled out his laptop and opened a presentation, the same one I'd been working on for weeks. I froze as I watched him explain my own strategies to Tiffany, who nodded along like she was taking notes. This is exactly what we need, Aaron said. Once we undercut them, there's no way they'll win the bid. Tiffany hesitated for a moment. You're sure this won't come back to me? Aaron smirked. Relax. Andrew's too busy to notice. And even if he does, it's not like he'll figure out where the leak's coming from. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't just dealing with an affair, I was dealing with a conspiracy. That night, as Tiffany slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her, not yet. If I tipped her off too soon, she'd deny everything, and Aaron would cover his tracks. I needed a plan. Something airtight. Something that would not only expose their betrayal, but make them regret ever crossing me. It was time to fight back. Quietly. Methodically. And when the time was right, I'd make my move. Once I decided to fight back, my first step was to document everything. I mean everything. I downloaded the footage of their little meeting in my kitchen and backed it up in multiple places. My laptop, a cloud drive, even a couple of USB sticks. There was no way I was letting this evidence disappear. Next, I started digging into Aaron. If he thought he could sabotage my career, I'd make sure his was on the line too. A quick online search pulled up his LinkedIn profile, which confirmed he worked for the rival company. But it also showed something even more interesting. He wasn't just some middle manager. Aaron was a senior executive. That meant his actions carried serious consequences, both legally and professionally. At work, I started paying closer attention to the contract negotiations. I reviewed every email, every memo, every document, looking for signs that someone had been tampering with my work. Sure enough, there were discrepancies. Small ones, but enough to raise red flags. Numbers that didn't add up. Clauses that had been altered. It was subtle, but it was there. I brought it up with my assistant, Claire, a sharp woman who'd been with the company longer than I had. Hey, have you noticed anything off with the documents for the Jefferson deal? She frowned, flipping through a stack of papers on her desk. Now that you mention it, some of the revisions came in later than usual. And the wording seemed different. Why? I leaned in, lowering my voice. Don't mention this to anyone, but I think someone's been trying to sabotage the deal. Claire's eyes widened. Sabotage? By who? I'm still figuring that out, I said. But keep an eye on anything that looks unusual, and let me know right away. Claire nodded, her expression serious. You've got it. With Claire's help, I was able to trace some of the changes back to anonymous edits made outside our usual systems. It was another piece of the puzzle, proof that someone had been meddling with the contract from the outside. And I had a pretty good idea who. At home, things were tense. Tiffany seemed oblivious to the fact that I was onto her, but the cracks in her facade were starting to show. She was jumpy, avoiding eye contact, and spending more time on her phone than ever. I noticed she'd started locking it, which only made me more suspicious. One evening, as she was showering, I decided to test something. Using one of the hidden cameras, I recorded myself trying to guess the passcode on her phone. It took a few tries, but I got it, our wedding anniversary. I almost laughed at the irony. Once inside, I scrolled through her messages and found a treasure trove of conversations with Aaron. Most of it was what you'd expect, flirty texts, inside jokes, and thinly veiled plans to meet up. But there was also something else. Aaron had been coaching her on how to get information out of me. One message read, "Make it seem like you're just curious. Andrew loves explaining things, it's his weakness." Another said, "If he gets defensive, back off. We don't want him to suspect anything yet." Yet. That word made my skin crawl. They were playing me, manipulating me like I was some clueless pawn in their little game. But now I had them. Between the texts, the footage, and the tampered documents, I had everything I needed to blow their scheme wide open. The only question was when and how. As tempting as it was to confront Tiffany right then and there, I knew I had to be patient. This wasn't just about exposing her betrayal, it was about taking down Aaron too. And if I played my cards right, I could do both in one devastating move. For now, I kept my cool. I smiled when I wanted to scream, stayed calm when I wanted to flip the table. But inside, I was counting down the days until I could finally drop the hammer. The hardest part of all this was acting normal around Tiffany. Every time she smiled at me or kissed my cheek, I had to fight the urge to pull away. Knowing what I knew, every moment felt like a performance. But I kept up the act. I had to. Timing was everything. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into the Jefferson deal, making sure every piece of the project was flawless. I knew Aaron was out there, lurking, waiting for me to slip up. But I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. If anything, I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized all his efforts had been for nothing. Claire, my assistant, was my rock during this time. She didn't know the full story, but she sensed that something big was going on. "You've been different lately," she said one afternoon, handing me a stack of files. "Focused. Intense." "Just trying to get things right," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Well, whatever it is, you've got this," she said, giving me a small smile. It was a brief moment of encouragement in an otherwise chaotic few weeks. At home, Tiffany's behavior became more erratic. She started making more excuses to leave the house. Errands that took hours, sudden girls' nights, with friends I'd never heard of. I didn't even have to check the cameras to know where she was going. But I checked anyway. There she was, meeting Aaron at a small cafe downtown. It wasn't even subtle. They sat in a corner booth, leaning close, her hand brushing his arm. I watched as they laughed, their heads tilted together like some love-struck teenagers. It was sickening. I fast-forwarded through the footage until they left the cafe, Aaron walking her to her car. He leaned in, and she kissed him. Not a quick peck, either, a lingering, passionate kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose it. The next day, I decided to take things up a notch. I contacted a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in both divorce and corporate law. His name was Greg, and he was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly what I needed. "So let me get this straight," Greg said, leaning back in his chair as I explained the situation. "Your wife is having an affair with this Aaron guy, and they're also trying to sabotage your career?" "Exactly," I said, handing him a USB stick with some of the evidence I'd gathered. "I need to handle this delicately. I want to expose them both, but I also need to protect myself, legally and professionally." Greg nodded, scrolling through the files on his laptop. "You've got solid evidence here. The texts, the footage, the tampered documents. This is a strong case. But you need to be strategic about how you use it. What do you suggest?" I asked. He smirked. "You've got two battles here, one at home and one at work. We'll handle them simultaneously. For the corporate side, I'd recommend bringing this to your company's legal team. Let them deal with Aaron. As for your wife, well, that's up to you." I left Greg's office feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The pieces were finally coming together. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to set everything in motion. That moment came sooner than I expected. 2 days after meeting with Greg, an opportunity fell into my lap, a corporate celebration event for the Jefferson deal. It was one of those big, flashy parties where everyone from the company's executives to the cleaning staff showed up. The perfect stage. Aaron and his team were also invited, as the rival company had recently landed a minor collaboration deal with ours. It wasn't related to the Jefferson contract, but it meant he'd be there, smug as ever, probably thinking he was untouchable. That was my chance to expose him, and Tiffany. At home, I played my part flawlessly. I casually mentioned the event to Tiffany over dinner. "There's a company celebration on Friday," I said, cutting into my steak. "You should come. It'll be a good chance to meet some of my colleagues." She hesitated, her fork paused mid-air. "Oh, Friday? I think I have plans with Megan." Megan. One of the friends she conveniently mentioned whenever she needed an alibi. "Cancel them," I said with a small smile. "It'll be fun." Plus, there's free champagne. Her eyes flickered, and for a moment, I thought she'd argue. But she nodded. Okay. I'll come. Perfect. On the night of the event, I made sure everything was in place. I wore my sharpest suit, the one Tiffany had always complimented when we first started dating. She dressed up too, in a sleek black dress that made her look stunning. If only I could still see her the way I used to. Instead, all I felt was cold determination. When we arrived, the room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of casual conversation. I introduced Tiffany to a few of my colleagues, and she put on her usual charm, laughing and smiling like the perfect wife. But I kept a close eye on her. Sure enough, within 20 minutes, she was scanning the room. It didn't take her long to spot him. Aaron stood near the bar, holding court with a group of people who seemed mesmerized by whatever story he was telling. Tiffany excused herself, saying she needed to freshen up, and made a beeline for the hallway. I waited a few moments before following her. The hallway was quieter, dimly lit, with a few small clusters of people chatting. I spotted her near a corner, whispering into her phone. Aaron, I'm here. Where are you? My blood boiled, but I forced myself to remain calm. She didn't notice me watching as she disappeared around the corner. Back in the main room, I mingled with my colleagues, keeping an eye on both Tiffany and Aaron. They'd found each other, of course. She stood by his side, her hand brushing his arm as they talked in hushed tones. I slipped away to find Claire. She'd agreed to help me with the final part of my plan. Is everything set? I asked her quietly. She nodded. The presentation's loaded and ready to go. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I said, my voice steady. It's time. As the evening progressed, the company's CEO took the stage to give a speech about the Jefferson deal. It was the usual stuff. Congratulations to the team, praise for our hard work, a toast to our success. But just as the CEO wrapped up, I stepped forward. Excuse me if I could just add something, I said, my voice carrying through the room. The crowd turned to look at me, curious. Even Tiffany and Aaron froze, their heads snapping toward the stage. I'd like to share a quick presentation about some challenges we faced during the Jefferson deal, I said, clicking the remote to start the slideshow. The screen behind me lit up with the first slide, a blurry screenshot of Aaron and Tiffany sitting in my kitchen. Gasps rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide, text messages between Aaron and Tiffany discussing how to extract information from me. Another click, and the tampered documents appeared, with clear annotations showing the edits made from Aaron's IP address. The room fell silent, save for a few whispered conversations. I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with Tiffany and Aaron. Their faces were pale, their expressions frozen in shock and horror. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice steady, is how certain individuals attempted to undermine this company's success for their own gain. The room erupted. Executives muttered angrily, people glared at Aaron, and Tiffany stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Security moved toward Aaron, who looked like he was about to bolt. I stepped off the stage, walking past Tiffany without a word. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The room was chaos. Voices rose, and all eyes darted between Aaron, Tiffany, and me. Aaron tried to salvage the situation, raising his hands defensively. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice shaking. These screenshots are fake. Andrew's just trying to discredit me. But the damage was done. The executives weren't buying it. One of the senior VPs, a sharp woman named Linda, stepped forward. Aaron, is that your email address in these messages? She asked, her tone icy. Aaron stammered, unable to come up with a convincing lie. Tiffany looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Claire, standing near the back of the room, gave me a small nod. She'd worked with me to verify the tampered documents, cross-referencing IP addresses and timestamps. We'd made sure the evidence was airtight. Aaron, Linda continued, I suggest you call your legal team. You'll need them. Security escorted Aaron out, his protests growing weaker with each step. Tiffany stood rooted to the spot, her face pale and her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. I didn't acknowledge her. I couldn't. Not yet. When I returned home that night, Tiffany wasn't far behind. She walked in quietly, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Andrew, she started, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I sat down on the couch, arms crossed. Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything? Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I can explain, she said weakly. Explain what, Tiffany? That you've been sleeping with Aaron? That you've been feeding him information to sabotage my career? Or that you've been lying to my face every single day? She flinched at my words, sinking onto the armchair across from me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. I laughed bitterly. It just happened? Tiffany, affairs don't just happen. Betraying your husband, your family, your integrity, that's not an accident. That's a choice. She started crying, her sobs shaking her shoulders. I didn't want to hurt you, Andrew. I swear. I got caught up in something, and I didn't know how to get out. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Don't play the victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing. She tried to compose herself, wiping her tears. What do we do now? She whispered. I don't know about you, I said, standing up, but I'm contacting my lawyer. You'll be hearing from him soon. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Andrew, please. Don't throw everything away. We can work through this. I'll do anything. I stared at her for a long moment, the woman I'd once loved now a stranger. You already threw everything away, Tiffany. I'm just cleaning up the mess. The next day, I met with Greg, my lawyer, to begin the divorce process. He was thorough and efficient, outlining every step we'd need to take. With the evidence you've gathered, you're in a strong position, he said. But be prepared, this won't be easy. Affairs like this tend to get messy. I'm ready, I said, though my stomach churned at the thought. At work, Aaron's downfall was swift and brutal. The company launched an internal investigation, and within days, he was terminated. Legal action followed, though I left most of that to the corporate lawyers. The important thing was that the Jefferson deal was safe. My career was intact. Tiffany, meanwhile, had moved out of the house and into a small apartment. She texted me daily, pleading for a second chance, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. My focus was on moving forward, not looking back. 1 week later, I sat in my now quiet living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the fallout, it was a lot to process. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The first few days after Tiffany moved out were surreal. The house felt emptier than I'd expected, even though she'd only taken a few of her things. Her favorite mug was gone from the cabinet, her shoes no longer cluttered the entryway, and her perfume didn't linger in the air. Good riddance, I thought. But the silence was heavy. I spent the weekend cleaning, not just for the sake of tidiness, but as a way to reclaim the space. Every corner of the house felt tainted, a reminder of the lies and betrayal that had unraveled here. I boxed up the photos of us together and anything else that felt like a relic of our life as a couple. By the end of the day, the house looked different. Mine again. But it didn't feel like home yet. At work, the fallout from Aaron's exposure was still rippling. While his termination was a huge relief, it also brought scrutiny. The company's executives were eager to figure out how such a breach had happened, and that meant long meetings, more paperwork, and countless questions. It was exhausting, but I didn't mind. Every conversation about Aaron felt like a small victory, a reminder that I'd taken control and protected my career. Claire, my assistant, was a constant source of support. You handled this like a pro, she said one afternoon, handing me a coffee. Most people would have lost their minds. Trust me, I came close, I admitted. I just couldn't let him win. Well, you didn't, she said with a small smile. And if you ever need someone to vent to, I'm here. It was a kind gesture, and I appreciated it more than I could say. Claire was one of the few people who had seen me at my lowest, and her steady presence kept me grounded. One evening, about 2 weeks after the corporate event, I got a text from Tiffany. I hadn't blocked her number, not yet anyway. Part of me wanted to see if she'd finally take responsibility for what she'd done. Tiffany, can we please talk? Just one conversation. I need to explain myself. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct told me to ignore her, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, neutral ground where emotions wouldn't spiral out of control. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table near the window. Tiffany walked in a few minutes later, looking nervous and out of place. She'd always been so composed, but now she seemed small, vulnerable. "Hi," she said, sitting down across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, staying silent. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to start. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About everything I did." "Good," I said flatly. "You should." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. "Andrew, I know I hurt you. More than I can ever fix. I was selfish, and I let things spiral out of control. But I want you to know, it wasn't because of you." I scoffed. "That's supposed to make me feel better? You betrayed me, Tiffany. You destroyed our marriage. Whether it was because of me or not doesn't change what you did." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I felt stuck. Like I wasn't enough for you, or for myself. And Aaron, he made me feel noticed." "Noticed?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "I noticed you, Tiffany. I loved you. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for someone who used you to get to me." Her head dropped, her tears falling onto the table. "I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. She looked genuinely broken, like someone who'd finally realized the magnitude of her mistakes. But then I remembered the months of lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. "I'm glad you realize that," I said, standing up. "But it doesn't change anything. We're done." "Andrew, please," she started, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Goodbye, Tiffany." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. But most of all, I felt free. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like closing a door not just on Tiffany, but on a chapter of my life that had been weighing me down for far too long. The cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. No more lies. No more second-guessing. But freedom also came with emptiness. I was on my own now, and that reality hit me harder than I expected. The next few weeks were a mix of highs and lows. I threw myself into work, finishing the Jefferson deal with more determination than ever. It became a kind of therapy, giving me something to focus on besides the wreckage of my personal life. The project wrapped successfully, and the company was thrilled with the results. Linda, the senior VP who had called Aaron out at the event, stopped by my office one day with a bottle of whiskey. "For surviving the storm," she said with a smile. We shared a glass, and for the first time in a while, I allowed myself to feel proud. I'd not only saved the deal but proven to everyone, and to myself, that I could rise above the chaos. At home, I began carving out a new routine. I redecorated the house bit by bit, making it feel less like our place and more like my place. The living room got a fresh coat of paint, I swapped out the bedding, and I even bought a new couch, one that didn't hold any memories of Tiffany. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't anticipated. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One Saturday morning, Claire called me out of the blue. "Hey, a few of us from work are grabbing drinks tonight. You should come." I hesitated. Socializing wasn't exactly high on my list of priorities. But Claire insisted. "You've been through hell, Andrew. You deserve a break. Come on, it's just a few drinks." Against my better judgment, I agreed. That evening, I found myself at a lively bar downtown, surrounded by coworkers who seemed determined to make me forget my troubles. Claire was there, of course, along with a few others from the office. For the first hour or so, I stuck to the edge of the group, nursing a beer and keeping the conversation light. But as the night went on, I found myself relaxing. Claire had a way of drawing me out, cracking jokes and making me laugh in a way I hadn't in months. It felt good, normal, even. At one point, she leaned in and said, "You know, you're a lot less uptight when you're not thinking about work." "Is that a compliment or an insult?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She laughed. "A compliment, I think." By the end of the night, I realized I'd actually had fun. It wasn't a huge breakthrough or anything, but it was a step. And for the first time, I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Claire. "Claire, last night was fun. You should come out with us more often. You need to loosen up." I smiled, shaking my head. Claire had been a godsend through all of this, both at work and outside of it. I didn't know where things were going, but for the first time in a long time, I was open to finding out. Monday morning rolled around, and I found myself settling into my usual routine at the office. The Jefferson deal had wrapped up, and things were finally starting to calm down. For the first time in months, my inbox wasn't a war zone, and I didn't feel like I was constantly fighting fires. Then Claire walked in, carrying her usual coffee and wearing an unusually bright smile. "Morning, boss," she said, placing a folder on my desk. "Morning, Claire. You're in a good mood," I said, glancing up at her. She shrugged, her smile turning playful. "Maybe I'm just relieved you actually had fun on Saturday. I was starting to think you didn't know how." I chuckled. "Don't get used to it. One night doesn't mean I'm a changed man." Her grin didn't waver. "We'll see about that." Over the next few weeks, Claire and I found ourselves spending more time together, both at work and outside of it. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, less complicated. At first, I chalked it up to her personality. Claire was one of those people who could put anyone at ease. But the more we talked, the more I realized how much I enjoyed her company. It wasn't just her humor or her wit. It was the way she listened, the way she seemed to genuinely care about what I had to say. She never pushed me to talk about Tiffany or the divorce, but she always knew when I needed a distraction. One evening, after another long day at the office, Claire stopped by my desk. "Hey," she said, leaning against the edge. "There's this new taco place down the street. Want to check it out?" My treat. I hesitated. It wasn't a date, not exactly. But it felt like something more than just two co-workers grabbing dinner. "Sure," I said finally. "Why not?" The taco place was small and bustling, with bright string lights hanging from the ceiling and music playing softly in the background. Claire ordered for both of us, insisting that I had to try the house special. "Trust me," she said with a wink. "You won't regret it." She was right. The tacos were incredible, but it was the conversation that made the night memorable. We talked about everything: work, life, our favorite movies, the worst dates we'd ever been on. By the time the food was gone, I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed so much. As we walked out into the cool night air, Claire turned to me, her expression softening. "You're different than I thought you'd be," she said. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "When I first started working with you, you were so serious. I thought you were one of those people who only cared about the bottom line. But there's more to you than that." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just smiled. "Thanks, Claire. That means a lot." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I wasn't sure what was happening between us, but it felt good, natural. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I deserved to be happy again. The next morning at work, I caught myself looking forward to seeing Claire. It wasn't like me. I'd always prided myself on keeping my personal life separate from my professional one. But there was something about her that made me want to break my own rules. When she strolled into the office, coffee in hand and her usual easy smile in place, I couldn't help but grin. "Morning, Claire." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, someone's in a good mood today. Did you finally get a full night's sleep, or are you still dreaming about those tacos?" "Maybe a little of both," I replied, earning a laugh from her. The rest of the day flew by, with Claire popping into my office every so often to share a joke or update me on a project. Each interaction felt effortless, like we'd known each other forever. But underneath the banter, there was a new undercurrent, something unspoken but undeniable. That Friday, Claire invited me out again, this time to a trivia night at a local bar. "It'll be fun," she said. "And I could use a partner who actually knows stuff about contracts and legal jargon. You'd crush the boring topics category." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I joked. "Count me in." The bar was packed, the atmosphere buzzing with energy. Claire and I found a small table near the front, surrounded by teams scribbling furiously on answer sheets. She ordered us drinks, and for the next couple of hours, we dominated the trivia game, mostly thanks to her knowledge of pop culture and my random knack for geography. "See," she said, nudging me as our team was announced the winner. "I knew you'd be good at this." "You mean we'd be good at this," I corrected. She laughed, raising her glass. "To the dream team." "To the dream team," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. After trivia night, we decided to take a walk to wind down. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of street lamps. Claire walked beside me, her hands stuffed into her jacket pockets. "So," she said, glancing up at me, "you've been smiling more lately. It's a good look on you." Yeah, well, I've had a pretty great partner in crime lately, I said, meeting her gaze. She stopped walking, her expression shifting. Andrew. I know we've been spending a lot of time together, and I don't want to overstep, but I feel like there's something here. Do you? Her honesty caught me off guard, but I appreciated it. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I do, I admitted. But I've been through a lot, and I'm still figuring things out. I don't want to rush into anything and mess this up. Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. I get that. And I'm not in a hurry. I just wanted to put it out there. Whatever this is, I'm okay with taking it slow. Thanks, Claire, I said softly. That means a lot. We walked in silence for a while after that, but it wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable. Like we both knew this was just the beginning of something worth exploring. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. Claire was right, there was something between us. Something real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ready to see where it could go. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I settled into an easy rhythm. We didn't label whatever was growing between us, but we didn't need to. We grabbed dinner after work sometimes, exchanged jokes during meetings, and texted late into the night about everything and nothing. It was the kind of connection I hadn't realized I'd been missing. At work, things were calmer. The chaos Aaron had caused was finally behind me, and the Jefferson deal had solidified my reputation. But outside the office, I was still rebuilding, piece by piece, step by step. One evening, Claire invited me to her apartment for dinner. I make a mean spaghetti carbonara, she'd said, and I didn't need much convincing. When I arrived, the smell of garlic and parmesan filled the air, and she greeted me with a smile and a glass of wine. Her apartment was cozy, filled with little touches that reflected her personality: bright artwork, a stack of books on the coffee table, and a fuzzy blanket draped over the couch. It felt warm, inviting, the opposite of how my house had felt since Tiffany left. Don't expect five-star dining, Claire joked as she set 2 plates on the table. But I promise it's edible. I took a bite and raised an eyebrow. This is way better than edible. You've been holding out on me. She grinned. Well, I had to make sure you deserved it first. Dinner turned into hours of conversation. We talked about our childhoods, our families, our dreams. Claire told me about her brother, who'd been her rock when their parents divorced, and I told her about the nights I'd spent at the office during the worst of the mess with Tiffany, trying to avoid going home to a house filled with tension. At some point, we moved to the couch, the wine glasses refilled and the conversation growing softer, more intimate. Can I ask you something? Claire said, tucking her legs beneath her. Of course. What was it like, finding out about Tiffany? I mean, how did you handle it? Her question caught me off guard, but I appreciated her honesty. I took a deep breath, staring at the glass in my hand. At first, I didn't handle it. I think I was in denial. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, even when the evidence was staring me in the face. And when it all came out, I felt like my whole world had been ripped out from under me. Claire reached out, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I'm sorry you went through that. Thanks, I said, meeting her gaze. But in a weird way, I think it made me stronger. I realized I couldn't control what other people did, but I could control how I responded. That's why I fought back the way I did, with evidence, not just anger. I wanted to take back control. Her hand lingered for a moment before she pulled it away, a soft smile playing on her lips. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're handling it pretty damn well. As the evening wound down, I found myself reluctant to leave. Claire walked me to the door, her expression warm but hesitant. Thanks for tonight, I said. It was exactly what I needed. Me too, she said softly. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us charged with something unspoken. Then, without overthinking it, I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't rushed or overly dramatic, just a soft, lingering kiss that felt like the beginning of something real. When we pulled apart, she smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. Good night, Andrew, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Good night, Claire. As I walked back to my car, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt hopeful, not just about moving on, but about the future. The days after our kiss were a turning point. Claire and I didn't rush anything. At work, we kept things professional, exchanging knowing smiles but staying focused. Outside of work, things were different. We started seeing each other more, gradually peeling back layers. A movie night at her place. A Sunday walk in the park. It wasn't flashy or overly complicated, just two people getting to know each other without pressure. One Saturday, we took a spontaneous road trip to a nearby vineyard. Over glasses of wine, we talked about everything from our favorite childhood memories to the kind of lives we wanted. This, she said, gesturing to the quiet vineyard, this is what happiness looks like to me. Simple, honest, and real. I nodded. Me too. No more games. Just this. By the time we returned, something had shifted. It wasn't just an escape, it was a glimpse of what life could be. For the first time, I wasn't looking back at what I'd lost, I was looking forward to what I might gain. Just as things with Claire were beginning to feel steady, a reminder of my past came crashing in. Tiffany texted me out of the blue. Tiffany, can we talk? I need closure, Andrew. Please. I stared at the message for a long moment. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I used to be. But the thought of opening that door again made my chest tighten. After some hesitation, I replied. Me fine. Tomorrow afternoon. The coffee shop. The next day, I sat at the same table where I'd ended things with Tiffany weeks ago. She walked in, looking nervous, her usual confidence gone. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sitting down. I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. What do you need, Tiffany? I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know. I'm sorry. Truly. Her voice cracked, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I used to love. But it didn't change the facts. I appreciate that, I said. But sorry doesn't erase what you did. I know, she said quickly. I didn't want things to end like this. I wanted you to know it wasn't all lies. I did love you, Andrew. I still do, in a way. I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us. Finally, I stood up. Tiffany, I'm moving on. I hope you find peace, but this is the last time we need to do this. Goodbye. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt lighter. Whatever hold Tiffany had on me was gone. Later that evening, I told Claire about the meeting. She listened quietly, then smiled. You handled that exactly right, she said. Her words weren't just comforting, they were a reminder that my future wasn't in the past. It was here now with her.